make you think differently about your place in the world. Anyway, that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about landmarks of our lives, where we're going to talk about the role local businesses can play in fostering community and how we can revive the high street and neighbourhood parades, and how local independent stores can compete in a digital age. Now, particularly pleased to be involved today. I'm particularly pleased about the title because actually for once it's not about building stuff necessarily, it's about how we use place. And given that 85% of the buildings that will be in existence in 100 years' time are already built, we need to debate a little bit more vigorously how we are using place and not just what we build. When I explain to you what I do for a living and my role here, you'd be surprised to know that when we were asked about what was going to be the major regeneration force going forward, I didn't choose reinvigorating high streets. I chose jobs, because it's jobs that make a place. Often the debate's hijacked by talking about housing. Often it's talked about titivating the high street, whereas real places you need gross value add. You need places where there are valuable jobs that will keep people in the community, work in the community, adding to the community. So why would that be a surprising thing for me to suggest? Well, the eagle-eyed amongst you will notice that I'm not Professor Kathy Parker. The esteemed professor is indeed a professor, and she's the Joint Chief Executive of the High Street Task Force. I'm the chair of the High Street Task Force Board. And while she's a professor, I've got a degree from Oxford Poly. So unfortunately, the debate might be somewhat cheapened compared to what we would have had if Kathy had been doing it. But to go into these issues, we've got an absolutely fantastic panel. We've got a developer, a designer, a director of policy, and dare I say it, even a dynamic, disruptive thinker. Yes. You again, Aria. Okay, so what I'm going to do is briefly introduce each panel, then ask them to spend hopefully 3 minutes or so with their views on the topic, and we'll work through like that, and then we'll have a few questions, then throw it open to the audience. So I'll start, run down the line in order. So starting off with Will Robinson, who's the Development Director at Areli Developments. Will's got over 25 years of experience specialising in delivery from inception to completion in a range of mixed-use town centre regeneration projects, which is important for the context of this conversation. But the vast majority of these were developed in joint ventures with public and private sector, requiring extensive stakeholder engagement, which was the topic of the last session. Will is Director of Development at Areli, leading major regeneration projects in Maidenhead and Orpington, where they're focused on creating vibrant and socially sustainable town centre communities. So, Will, over to you.
Hi, good afternoon everybody, and it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for the introduction, Mark. Quite rightly, the talk is today about community, business and jobs. Equally, I come from a development background. I think it's really important from the development side as well, is how you stitch in to the existing fabric of the town. So whilst this is, I will also look a little bit at the development side, forgive me as well. And so I've sort of over 25 years experience in town centre region, and we all know that town centres have evolved and changed massively over that time. They always have, they always will. One thing that they always have been is the heartbeat of any community, and I think they always will be. It needs a little bit of pumping at the moment to get that pulse really racing, but that's certainly something that can be done, and that needs to be the heartbeat of the community, as I say. In the last 15 years, the changes have been absolutely seismic, the like of which I don't think we've ever seen before. And it's moved at an incredible pace, and COVID's massively accelerated that pace of change in the town centres. I actually think that's quite a good thing. I think town centres are dying a slow death, if I'm honest, and I think actually what COVID has brought around is the acceleration. And I think it's brought a real focus for people who are in this room today to bring about that change more quickly. You know, the move away from national retailers, they need less stores. Retail needs now are increasingly met online or in the major regional and provincial centres. And retail was always considered to be the sort of the fulcrum of the town. I think everybody's now starting to look outside of just purely retail, so I think that's really, really positive. You know, we're at a point now where there's a fantastic opportunity to really reimagine the high streets and create something that's vibrant. There's lots of talk about sustainability, and I think it kind of falls into three categories. There's the economy, there's just the environmental, and most importantly, something that we are really focused on massively is the social sustainability. And I think that's something that creates the place, it creates the town, and it creates that heartbeat that I talked about. So actually what the town centres need to be, they need to be somewhere, in my view, that where in the past it became somewhere you needed to go if you wanted to go to Next or to H&M, the food store. you've got to make it somewhere where people choose to go. People have so much choice now. How do we make the town centre somewhere that people choose to go? And how are we going to do it? Well, it's really difficult because every town centre is different, without a shadow of doubt. And the difference from north to south to east to west, London and the south east is very much its own sort of microcosm, really. But I think there are certain elements that you can translate. Right? That's not foreboding. There are certain ingredients that you can take across the piece. You need to connect people and places in towns. You've got to look at it holistically. So you need to connect people and places. Great design of buildings. There's some great buildings out there that just need a bit of TLC and bring it back to life. But it's creation of great places and spaces. It's a mix of uses. I talked earlier. It's not just this focus on retail that it used to be. It's a mix of uses that resonate, and it's creating, importantly, and I think this is where development comes in. You need town centre population. You need people on the doorstep to serve and support the whole offer. So it's that ecosystem we talk about a lot. Is this community ecosystem of local and independents, of restaurants, creatives, massively big focus on creatives, leisure, community hubs that bring people together. You know, we want to make sure that I think town centres need to be connected and bring people from all walks of life, performances and events, etc. But the retail offer as well, importantly, needs to be focused, I believe now, on locals and independents. And how do we do that? How we do that is it needs mentoring, it needs nurturing. These people are going out there, putting their, coming out of their garages or out of their bedrooms where they've set up stores. They need support. This is a massive thing to set up a business. So I think a lot of mentoring and a lot of nurturing. And it needs support from landlords and developers. Alignment of interests. No more of the long leases and fixed rents, turnover-based rents are definitely the way forward. And flexible leases where people can expand, contract as their businesses grow. And you need to support them with tech, with promotions, social apps. So bringing everything together and creating this real focus. And it's not about a shopping centre here and high street there. It's bringing it all into one piece. And I think what local businesses do, and we've seen it increasingly, is they're just authentic. And they bring personal touch. You know, deliveries to home. People do key waivers and so somebody will go and pack stuff away for an old lady. We've been involved in schemes like that. I mean, it's just, they'll change their offer to meet what customers want. And it's really bringing the high street back to what it was, frankly. It's actually going back to that butcher, the baker, the mix. It's creating a real community focus where people meet. That's what I used to do with my grandmother. I grew up in the East Midlands, and we used to go on a Thursday to Loughborough Market and a Saturday into Nottingham city centre. And you met people, the same people. You get the market stall holders, the butchers. I come from a family of butchers. So I worked in that. So that real personal touch and important role in people's lives. But you need theatre and experience. I love seeing the creatives. I think there's such a role to play for creators and makers. So I talk about people wanting to do things. It's a day out, or an afternoon out. You go, you meet your friends, and to what's better than watching somebody make a pot or make a chair or upholster a chair. Actually seeing people do things alongside it's theatre and it's event. And I think once you're there, then there's all the incidental bits that go from it. I think locals, they're invested. They've got much more so. Local businesses invested in their areas are critical because they bring around, they support the environment, they support the environment they're in with pride, responsibility, and it just creates that real pleasant environment where people choose to spend their time. Also, very quickly, but I do think importantly, we've got this great offer, but it needs fuel, and the fuel is people, and they need to be on the doorstep. And you need to create the right homes for people that are working from home and co-working, to open that all up to communities, so you create a real hub of activity in the town centre. And if we can, and it's not in all instances, offices play a really important role as well. And for offices, it bring that 9 to 5 footfall and focus in the town. So it's about, I'll come back to, all about, for me, I think it's the focus on local and independent businesses. It's getting that sort of rich cocktail of uses into the heart of the town centre and creating a proper town centre community which is classless and brings people together.
All good. Hard to disagree with anything you said there. But at the end of the day, developers have historically funded development on nice, long, 25-year leases to national covenants. How do you make change happen when, if the values aren't there?
Well, Mark, I think it's, again, a good question. And I'll be honest, I've done this for 25 years. I've been involved in lots of town centre regenerations. I started off as 25-year leases, then became 15, then became 10, and latterly became 5. And I got really frustrated that the process from funding institutions, you turn away really good retailers that would create real interest because they didn't have a long lease. Frankly, a lease is worthless. The CVA is done for that, and I think whilst it was painful, I think that's quite good. I think that's good. I think actually when you look at from a regeneration point of view, and that's where I'm looking from a development point of view, and the schemes that we're involved in to a larger scale, the retail piece, the ground floor piece, is almost incidental in the overall scheme. So actually what you can do, it gives you the ability to align the interests, do the turnover rents, and actually if you get it right downstairs, and that's the heartbeat of the scheme. If you get it right, it adds value upstairs. So actually having the right offer downstairs on the right terms is far more important than having a 15-year lease and an X rent downstairs. I think where the challenges come, where the challenges come are the local, are the individual landlords.
Fantastic. So moving on to our next panellist, Ailbhe McNabola, Director of Policy and Communications at Power to Change, which is an independent trust supporting the growth of prosperous and cohesive communities through community businesses. An organisation I know well, we do lots of collaborations with High Street Task Force. Power to Change has invested over £100 million into the sector through targeted grants and support programmes. Ailbhe is also co-chair of the Social Research Association, a membership organisation that promotes excellence in social research. She has extensive programme delivery, policy analysis and research commissioning experience. So, over to you, Ailbhe.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks very much, Will, for that. Thanks everybody for coming today to hear us speak about this topic. I was really struck by something you just said about local businesses very invested in place, and I think for us, community businesses, which are the organisations that we fund and support, are probably the most invested local businesses. So you're talking about social enterprises owned and run by the local community. I mean, these organisations are running everything and anything. I think the ones that people tend to have heard of are things like communities taking over a pub, taking over a shop in an area where that's gone out of business and the market isn't providing. But from 5+ years of working in Power to Change and supporting them, they do everything and anything. I mean, I've seen oyster farms, I've seen city farms, everything and anything. And increasingly in recent years, and this is kind of why I'm here today, we've seen a lot of really ambitious community organisations and community businesses starting to do regeneration, particularly in deprived places. So starting to look at high streets in particular and starting to take over buildings, buy buildings back, and bit by bit try and put that life back into the high street. So this is something that started to attract our attention. We've done quite a bit of work supporting individual organisations that are doing that. Then also we do quite a bit of research and evaluation as well, so looking into actually why are these businesses here and what are they doing, why are community businesses getting into the high street. And some of the stuff that we kind of uncovered there was around the role they're playing is about, I suppose, diversifying the high street and bringing footfall back in and bringing different footfall in. So it's coming back to that idea of the high street as a civic space, not retail dominated, not monoculture anymore, but actually a place that is for the community. And so the question we were set today to talk about was, what role do local business play in fostering community? And obviously if you're a community-run business, then that's at your very core. And they're kind of hybrid organisations, and I know from talking to a lot of these kind of organisations, they're always trying to balance the market with the community, so trying to make a profit and trying to trade and trying to do something that is economic, but also at the same time trying to meet the needs of a local community and trying to improve the place and contribute something. And that is never an easy mix, and that's always something that's a bit of a challenge, but also I think it's part of where the exciting energy comes from. So some of the research and work we've done on these kinds of organisations does show that they are definitely part of reviving a high street. They bring in footfall, they diversify the high street. We were also really interested in the question of the impact they have on other local small businesses in particular, and whether or not actually they might be squeezing people out. And the work that we've done found that actually it's quite a mutually supportive ecosystem, because you've got a lot of businesses on a high street, all of whom are interested in that place and in that place thriving and growing, and that these businesses do actually support each other, and even down to things like pricing, so that they won't compete with each other, sort of making sure that they're serving slightly different segments of the same market. A really good example that I would talk to you about, because I know this is all a little bit abstract, is in Bury in Greater Manchester. There's a market hall which had been a very beautiful historic market hall called Radcliffe Market Hall, which had been revived by, it was council owned and it had been invested in and beautifully done up. So it was very beautifully restored, and it was almost entirely empty. It had about 10% capacity use at that time, and the community kind of came forward to the council and said, look, we'll have a go at taking this over and running it. So it's been running as a community business for a number of years now, and they've gone from 3 stalls to 32, which is full capacity, and it's completely, really vibrant, really heaving essentially in the evenings. During the day, this business is kind of, like you say, it's a butcher and baker. It's a lot of traditional market stall offer that the town was used, people actually welcome having back. But in the evenings, you've got a sort of a food offer, you've got a different, sort of more family-friendly evenings out, and it's bringing people back into town and making people locally talk to us about it, saying it kind of makes them feel proud of the place, that they realise what this place can do, and actually that it can be attractive and it can, bring itself back up. So I think if we agree, and I hope everyone here does, that we must ensure there's a space for communities to kind of get onto the high street, to be part of that mix, to be part of reviving high streets. The question is how we make more of that happen, and from our work we've kind of identified 3 ways in which we think you could help to make this happen. And one of them is around transparency. So you just mentioned owners there, and one of the real issues that community organisations encounter when they're trying to get access to high street space is who owns the buildings. If there's a derelict building on a high street, who owns it? Can you find out who owns it? If you can't identify the owner, or they're an overseas investor and they're uncontactable, where do you start? How can you get access to that space? And I know that there's, the legislation is in the works, and this is coming, apparently, this sort of register of beneficial ownership, which would make all of that more transparent, but it's been very slow, and that's something that we would like to see happen more quickly. The second thing is around funding. If you want to get access to space, especially in high streets, even if they're less prosperous, it still costs quite a lot of money, and so we have been calling the government and other funders. We've put forward the idea of a high streets buyout fund that would be able to act on behalf of communities. So buy up a space. If a really iconic vacant building in a high street comes up for sale, the worst case scenario is that it's bought by an overseas investor and then left vacant again for X number of years. What we'd like to see happen is that some of those really important buildings are secured, and then you can work with the community to get that building used, to get the community into it, put the cafes, the health and wellbeing courses, whatever it is that the local community wants to see in that market, into the space. So that's a fund that we'd like to see government support us on, and that's something we're calling for at the moment. Third and final thing is around powers, because I think in order to really get communities into high streets everywhere, you do need some changes. So in 2012 there was the Localism Act, which gave communities the right to bid on properties that they had nominated as an asset of community value, which was is great, and it was a great principle, but actually work we've done has shown that that's very rarely used and really is far too weak, and we actually think that a community right to buy, where the community has the right of first refusal to take on a building that comes up for sale that the community has said that matters to us, is a better way to go, and that's something else we'd like to see happen. But I can say more about that when we get into discussion, and I'll leave it there for now.
Fantastic. Loaded question. What else can we do to help access the high streets and places, to give places a platform for their business?
He says. Yes, I mean, apart from sort of money, power, and that transparency around ownership, I think the fourth thing, which I didn't mention, but I knew Mark would, is around connecting people. So like today, Platform Places is something we're both involved in, and it's a forum and a website, platformplaces.com, bringing together groups that don't usually meet, so councils, local communities and community organisations, and those developers and asset owners, to actually talk about if you're actually interested in developing places, and what can you do, what are the interesting innovative things that are happening, how can we spread some of this around elsewhere. And we're using Platform Places to try and just do that peer sharing and driving knowledge.
Fantastic. So moving on to our designer, Eric Holding, heads up strategic projects at our sponsors JTP. Eric is a place strategist, architect and urban designer with over 25 years experience. He's led projects involving urban visioning, production of strategic guidance and the design of large-scale mixed-use developments. In 2020, Eric was appointed as a member of the High Street Task Force, not by me personally. Not that I have any objections to it, it's not part of my remit. One of the government's experts registered to help evolve and respond to the impact of COVID-19 and the general decline of the high street, which I think we have been talking about way before COVID. So do you want to share your thoughts on the agenda?
Yeah, sure. Thanks a lot. You'll see a lot of correlation here with what Will's been talking about, because we worked on that. These things are beginning to happen. People do realise that that's what needs to be done. I think in terms of the exam question here, what we need to recognise really about local business, and I think it was reflected in the McNabola project, was that what's important about local businesses is that they really, when it comes down to it, they are what differentiate one place from another. Without local businesses, we are all in clone high streets, clone towns, and although high street brands are really important, so I think there was a collective sense of loss when Woolworths closed up and down the country. It's those kind of local businesses that really make one place different from another. And if you look at something, not that I'm looking to the Evening Standard as being an oracle, but when the Evening Standard does a kind of review of an area and talks about Dulwich or Peckham or somewhere like that, and they choose what makes it locally distinctive, it is always a local business. Always a local business that stands out. And so we've been doing some work at the moment up in North Finchley, High Road, and we started that whole piece of work obviously by talking to everybody. We've had a lot of sessions up there before we really put pen to paper. And I think what's important to know about local business is kind of like what they do that's different. Yeah, and we all know this as, not as professionals sat up here, but as people that go out and use our local areas. So the first thing that they do really well is that they are kind of hyper-local and they really understand their audiences. That's what they do. So up in North Finchley, I'm going to skip to the kind of, actual examples of what we mean by this. There's a pub called the Bohemia. It's a microbrewery. It's not a hipster place. They don't even really mention that to anybody. We found that out almost by accident. They allow families and dogs in till 9 p.m. and then after that they've got to leave, and then it's much more of an adult place. And because they've talked to people about what they are and what they do, they've kind of created somewhere that is related to the people in the local community. So what we heard from people is that it's now where parent-teacher associations meet to have their meetings. It's where local book clubs meet to have their meetings. And so they've made themselves popular with their customers, with their local audience, by kind of thinking and listening about what's needed. And it's a third place, between the home and work. It's somewhere that you can get into for the price of a drink. So hyper-local, knowing your audience. The second one is being kind of culturally specific. So on North Finchley High Street, everyone referred to the Afghan shop that had come. They talked about lots of communities that had come through that area. They said the latest one was this Afghan shop that had opened, and we were asking them what did it mean, and they said, well, these cultural groups move in, they recognise that there are some things that they can't get locally, and so an entrepreneur from that group sets up a local business. They then become this kind of focal point for far more than retail. This is a cultural meeting point. It then offers a whole other culture to everyone that already lives there, which is seen as an asset. And incidentally, on that one, what was really interesting, they said they're now the cheapest fruit and vegetable seller on the high street. Everybody knows that. So they've now got a secondary audience of people that don't have as much money, can't afford to go to the Waitrose, can't afford to go to the Sainsbury's, and two worlds collide. So there's something really interesting. We walk past it as professionals. To us, it's a fruit and vegetable shop. Yeah? When you delve into it and ask people, you find out what these local businesses are doing. And finally, myself, what do we know about kind of local businesses? Since just before Christmas, these things have all happened to me with local businesses who have social agency and autonomy to make decisions on the fly. So I have bought shopping without having my wallet with me and taken it home, I'll pay you later. I have ordered something at the butcher. He knows my first name, didn't take my address, didn't take my phone number, didn't ask me to pay a deposit. I've been to a bakery that I go to all the time, it's slightly more expensive than Sainsbury's, who've given me a loaf of bread and didn't allow me to pay for it because it was slightly burnt. And they said, oh, it's the last one, we don't want to sell it to you. And finally, I disappeared for half an hour on New Year's Eve with the Indian shopkeeper over the road who said, you have to sit down and have a whiskey with me, and then gave me a bottle of whiskey. So they have that ability to engage with people, to draw you into a relationship with you. And you've got to kind of think about that, how different that it is from going to the really well-trained Sainsbury's staff near me who will all offer me have a nice day after I've left, and they're all really well-trained in customer care, but they don't have that degree of relationship with me. And to compete in the digital age, that's a superpower that they have. They need to capitalise on that superpower. We need to just get them into the spaces on the high street, and then they need to use their superpowers to bring a sense of kind of belonging out of us that means that we choose our relationship with them over getting something cheaper somewhere else.
Again, there's a lot of commonality on the table, and I'm here to sort of generate a debate, challenge occasionally. So, unfortunately, could I put it to you that actually designers such as you yourself and developers like Will over the last 25 years haven't been designing places for entrepreneurs, haven't been designing places for startups, because that's not what the market wanted. So how are we going to unpick that?
Yeah, well, I think without pushing blame away, I would say we're all going to remember that design is a lag factor. Design can only respond to the sentiment of people commissioning projects to be done. Yeah, so we can, we can put forward ideas for things, but ultimately, if it doesn't work in the pro forma, it doesn't happen. So there is a degree of you can only do what you're asked to do. However, I think that we do need to really understand the difference in design between just aesthetic design, making places look nicer, and actual designing for social interaction, and they are two totally different things. And I think that is where designers really need to focus their efforts, which is in not what things look like, but what they enable people to do, and the kinds of relationships that they bring people into with each other. So designing public space that people feel safe in, that allows for events that bring people together and create a kind of shared sense of ownership of the space. I think that that's what we need to learn much more from. And the most important thing of all from design is who we invite in. I mean, I'm super biased, I work for JTP. We start with not consultation, but with participation with local communities. So I've just told you a story about North Finchley. We begin by asking the question that was posed this morning out there: what is this place? What do we have here? We can look, but we don't understand how places are used on a habitual basis until we ask. And that's, I think, what designers can do much better.
Fantastic. Well, in the nicest possible way, it's nice to have somebody on the panel who doesn't have 25 years of experience, is a victim of the things that we've been doing for the last 25. So I'm looking for a fresh take from our final panellist, Aria Babu, who is Senior Director of Research at the Entrepreneurs Network. Aria is a Senior Researcher and Head of the Female Founders Forum. Prior to that, she worked at Gentian, a biodiversity startup, the Small Business Charter, a charity seeking to help universities support SMEs, and Public First, where she worked on projects about the economic impact of Google, which could be a panel all by itself, but let's try not to go there, and how to make funding R&D more popular with politicians and the general public. So, can we have a fresh take on the discussion we've been having today, please?
Yeah, I think so. I might start off by saying that I like good things and I don't like bad things, because it's about to sound like I don't like good things. I think the story of the British economy post the financial crisis is one where we've had really slow productivity. And the productivity growth seems to basically be that we are very good at creating highly innovative businesses at the very top end, like DeepMind and Vaxitech. But then we have this really long tail of low productivity businesses. And these are the kinds of businesses that we're talking about today, in a lot of cases. We're talking about your local florist, we're talking about your local bakery. In the UK, people who are self-employed or run their own businesses earn less than people who are employed. And I think part of the reason is we create so many policies and so much government structure around propping up this long tail of unproductive businesses, and it's damaging the rest of our economy. I'm thinking about things like we have a business rate system that is biased towards local businesses because councils are able to do business rates relief to very small local businesses, but the other businesses that don't receive this business rates relief are successful businesses. So if you started a bakery that then scales, like Gales, you don't have access to this kind of support anymore. We have other little interventions like this. I think a lot of the kinds of suggestions that Ailbhe was making about things that she would like to see communities be able to do are also chipping away at our economy. So she talks about things like making sure that communities have a right to buy properties themselves, driving the prices up and pricing out people who want to do other things. In fact, I kind of think she described lowering competition and business collusion when she talked about how sometimes community-owned businesses decide to not compete against each other. This actively makes you poorer. It means that you don't get people competing for your business, which is exactly what you want. And then we've got the final conversation about when when people are talking about community, there's a big question about which communities. I often find that when people form these community groups, it's the people with lots of free time who have the ability to be embedded in the community already. We're talking about like older people or people with families. And the people who do not get this access are people who moved to these places more recently. So what I'm thinking of, for example, is Soho. Soho is a great place where there are loads of like really cool shops and restaurants and businesses operating. And then in the pandemic, they were able to do al fresco dining. And then there's recently been a fight between Soho residents, people who managed to buy properties a long time ago, and people who are operating businesses in Soho, and people who go to Soho quite often for leisure. These people get to fight. These people fought about what they wanted Soho to be like. And the people who have the most time to organise, the people who have the most sway with their council, are older residents who had access. I'm thinking about my small town where, in Gerrards Cross, which is on the outside of London, there was a big fight about whether or not we get a Tesco. It was really frustrating being a young person in Gerrards Cross, where there was like an expensive butcher's and a couple of small businesses, and there was nowhere that you could just like go buy milk if you didn't have a car and you couldn't afford to drive over to the next town. I'm really glad Tesco won the fight, but it took 8 years. And yes, Fishers went out of business, the butchers went out of business, a lot of the small businesses went out of business, but Tesco then became a better place to be. No, Gerrards Cross became a better place to be. Tesco's fine. So yeah, I kind of disagree with a lot of the nature of these kinds of conversations. I actually want us to have a really dynamic economy where it's really easy to start businesses and easy to scale businesses, but I don't want to keep propping up unsuccessful businesses that I think should fail. And I think that's the difference.
I did promise you that she'd be an alternative disruptive thinker, and she hasn't let us down. Now, in a flanking movement, I'm going to sort of join your side of the debate from the other side of the table, and sort of maybe we don't have to ask any questions because you're going to stimulate enough debate. But I think it does speak to the point that often I find quite frustrating. Is a lot of this debate is often couched in incredibly privileged middle-class terms. We are privileged middle-class people on a table talking about what we want, we need, we like. Whereas I think Aria has, with some validity, talked about community needs as well as actually national economic needs. So let's kick off with Ailbhe, seeing that this anti-competition that you've been fostering is bad for us. Discuss.
Yes, thanks, Aria. No, it's all good. I mean, the one thing I will say is that, so where we fund and the organisations we support, is 70% of what we do is in the 3 most deprived deciles of the indices of multiple deprivation. So we're not talking about middle class communities who can, I mean, we do also fund, for example, some of the community pubs will be in more affluent areas, but we also find in those places, they're still doing a good thing, the community's coming together to kind of run a business and to sort of serve its own needs. They don't necessarily need our finance and investment to do that. But the places where we mostly work are very deprived communities, and the problem that's being addressed where the market isn't supporting people is actually a lack of places for people to come together, a lack of places to meet. There aren't the cafes, there aren't the pubs, there aren't places you feel safe to go, and there isn't that space for the community to interact. There aren't the spaces where you can have yoga classes or fitness or exercise. People lack that community space. And so I think what community businesses that we support are trying to provide is something the market isn't providing in a lot of places, because that sort of social benefit isn't valued as much as profit.
If people want the classes, why is the market not providing spaces to do that kind of thing?
I think it's got to do with the dynamics of markets. I guess it's about, especially in those more deprived communities, who's going to come in as a provider and supply them. So one of the areas I think is quite interesting, and also because I'm Irish, and it's very different where I grew up, is community transport in the UK, because the market's private. I'm going to get into territory where I'm really out of my depth here now, but I find it really interesting that a lot of the country's not served by bus services, and people have to set up community bus services, which are almost entirely volunteer run, to meet the needs of people so that people can get from where they live. And so, the market has decided that actually that's too expensive to run that route and not going to go in there. So there definitely are areas, I think, where the market isn't providing, and people have needs and say, actually, I would like to continue living here, and it's a good place to be, and I do want to stay here, but if I do want to stay here, I need services and I need access to good spaces. And I think particularly transport is quite an interesting one in the UK. So again, it's not my area of expertise, but we have ended up in a position where people have had to provide that for themselves.
Okay, to continue the debate slightly, to provide a little bit of challenge. So, more progressive investor developers like Areli, yes, you want the baker, candlestick maker, but do you want the food bank? Do you want the rehabilitation unit that's needed by the community just as much as your more vocal residents might want the organic artisan delicatessen?
It's a mixed mark. I think it's, if you talk about community, and that means community, that means everybody. We are in our scheme in Orpington. It's an existing shopping centre, and there we have the Hope Church, who provide a range of services in that existing centre. So they provide a food bank. They provide exactly that to thousands of people, and quite apart, frightening the increase when you speak to those guys in the last month. But they provide also they provide an elderly facility, a facility where elderly people meet. They produce a kids nursery, and one of the things, one of the things we are looking to do then, we're working hand in hand within the new shiny development, if you want to call it that. And it's not. We are absolutely committed that it'll be a community facility, and we're looking at how we integrate the Hope Church, because the great things they do, they're not, the church bit is almost, a sideline for them, a raft of different people from all walks of life. I always liken it, probably tells you more about me than anything, but I love a pub. I love going to the pub, and the one thing I love about it is, and I always have, is that you go in and you're who you are, whether you're middle class, lower class, upper class, doesn't matter. I don't think there is something, but everybody's there from 18, or sometimes younger, through to 80 and beyond. And people just come together in a hub and they talk about football, or cricket, or whatever it may be. And it's that community hub. And I think it's vital that the town centres get that back. And really that becomes a focus to make it a great place.
Eric, scribbling away.
Yeah, I think it was a great provocation. And I think we should think about it. I think we should definitely think about, like, what do we want? How do we, is there a difference between the two different kinds of local business? I think it's a really good question. What is dynamic and what is really just time to go on? But I do think that we need to also take into account what's happening within the market that makes those businesses less profitable. So, for example, we all know the stories of, I won't mention them, but one very big supermarket will take milk from a farmer. The farmer's very happy; it's 40% of his milk, and they'll then push that to 60. The farmer's even happier because, then they take it to 80, then they take it to 90, then they take it to 100%, and then they say we're paying you 20% less, and then 30% less, and then 40% less. And that is why milk is cheap in supermarkets, because that is what goes on. And I was talking to someone from a local record store. I'm a big vinyl collector, so I like talking to people in local record stores a lot. And he was saying that, the record companies have one price that they will sell to Tesco, Sainsbury's, with their records, and one that they sell to local record stores with. So when the big albums come out, he goes to Sainsbury's and buys them and then marks them up, because he can't make money on that's still less than they will sell to them for. So there is the market is loaded against small business, and I think that we need to kind of just. I totally can respond to your provocation. I think it's a great one. I think it's a great question. But I think equally we need to unpack why that is so. And I suspect there's probably kind of like 25% that should just go. You're right. They should just go. Why are we propping up that business? Is it really anything? But my dad's 95 years old, and his barber comes and picks him up and takes him, cuts his hair, and brings him home. Yeah, that Headmasters, which is down near us, which is a kind of global, they're not going to do that. So there are needs to be met, and they can only be met in some of these ways. So I think I like the provocation. I like being provoked into things, and it's definitely something to go away and think about. But I think we also need to think about why the market's like that.
Haven't we all fallen into the trap which panels such as this always do, especially this sort of this sort of title, in that you mentioned the word high street, everybody defaults to the vision of the high street. Our vision of the high street is shops. I'm often asked, what's the vision of a truly successful high street? And my off-pat answer, a successful high street of the 2020s looks a lot like the high street of the 1920s, but with less hats. And by that, I don't just mean all the independent stores. I mean the micro-manufacturing, the offices above shops, the living above shops. So have we not fallen into that trap? Everybody's pretty much talked about retail. How do we get good jobs back into town centres? You'd like to pick that one up?
Well, I think to a degree, it's a great question. I don't think of town centres as shops. I said that at the start. I think of it as a cocktail mix, colour what you like of uses. I think that's essential. So I don't think that's the case. Just going to the point, Aria's point, I think that's quite an interesting one. I will come back in a second, but I think that's really interesting because turnover-based rents do provide that opportunity where it is, you are successful. And it works both ways with turnovers and flexible basis. So you do play people in and out for the greater good, so everybody's aligned. So if somebody isn't performing, then there is an opportunity. That doesn't mean they're there forever for adding to the item. One of the things we looked at, Eric mentioned our Maidenhead proposal. Now, the Maidenhead is a town where we took the active decision to put a significant amount of office accommodation into that scheme, over 250,000 square feet of offices, because we felt that would bring jobs into the town. Now, they will be jobs of a certain type, of course, probably through offices, but increasingly, I think it's interesting post-pandemic, much more co-working, so there's an opportunity for that. And I think, so yes, there are opportunities to bring to bring employment into towns. Where it is challenging, let's be clear, is in some town centres, where does that? Where are the opportunities to drive employment? That is a real challenge. It isn't going to be the traditional office piece at all. So, the tradition, you are looking at the retail, the restaurant, community hubs, the leisure. They are going to drive probably the bulk of the employment within the town. I think it is a real challenge to say.
I would say that we don't need to drive employment at all. We currently have really high rates of employment, and we have since the financial crisis. Our problem is low productivity. If anything, we should be killing jobs by higher productivity and innovations, and therefore drive wages up. Our entire problem is that we have too many low productivity jobs and not enough high productivity jobs. So the question isn't how do we create more jobs like that, it's how do we make sure the businesses figure out how to sell to more customers. We have really low rates of, our SMEs have really low rates of tech adoption. So they don't use accounting software, they don't sell online, they don't do things that comparable European businesses do. So we don't need new businesses to create new jobs, really. We want new businesses to create new innovations, but we really want to drive productivity.
I did say good jobs in my question, to be fair, but there again, what is a good job? That's a whole different panel, of course. Alva, you got?
Coming back to this sort of the point on getting jobs into town centres. So there's some really interesting stuff I've seen in Liverpool. We've worked quite a bit where you've got organisations taking big spaces, big heritage buildings that are quite hard to imagine what you can do with them, and kind of divide them up into very small spaces and bringing in the makers, the people who are in their garages and in their spare bedrooms before. So creating a lot of economic activity, but it's maybe not the kind of economic activity that the Treasury traditionally thinks about. It's not sort of 500 jobs in one organisation all at once, but it's an incremental, very sort of supportive ecosystem of people, all sort of small businesses, makers, creators, and you create, and I think it's really exciting because it creates a sort of an atmosphere and a sense of culture in a place as well, what this place is like to be and why would you want to come here, why would you want to live and work here. And I do think they add something that your sort of enormous employers won't.
Now, I'm being a very poor chair and I've become a bit engrossed with my panel, but of course we've got 20 or 30 very informed people in this field sat in the audience who probably want to contribute to the debate. There's a gentleman with glasses who I think was spotting a fly or trying to get my attention. Yes?
Yeah. I just wondered, based off the conversation about creating new jobs and skills, how much discussions are out there towards pop-ups. There was a report by Bill Brinsley about 10 years ago which supported the idea of having more pop-ups, and as you go having a zone pop-ups in the town centre, allowing for people to be creative and to try an idea out, and if it was successful after 2 months, then adding and growing the local high street. We implemented it in town in Belgium. I just wondered what if that's the future of the high streets and what could we be doing to support those schemes?
I think this is an open goal for you to talk about how you're creating and curating space for pop-ups in your developments.
I think it's exactly right. I think what you've got to do is that sort of, I think you've got to produce places and an environment where people can grow, and they can grow organically. And equally, they can contract the same way, because what people want, they need the appropriate space for their business at the time. I think pop-ups are a fantastic idea. I think they give people a chance to trial. They give them a chance to trial on the basis that they're out there, and they can grow. They can adapt and move and change to the market demands. And I think that's what Eric's talked about. I talked about at the start. It's actually giving people a chance to find what the local community want. You know, this is where local retailers, local operators. We say I'm going to try and not say retailers, but local operators are so much more agile. And so yeah, I think absolutely 100%. We design it into all our schemes, and we ensure that flexible lease provision, so you can go from a pop-up to a little kiosk to a store and all the way through. I think it's essential.
I think there's one point on that as well, I think, which speaks exactly to Ari's point about if you do pop-ups can end up being kind of, they can be quite amateurish and look quite amateurish, but there are businesses out there now like Appear Here, which are using tech. You apply, there will be a number of venues, they will manage them professionally for you, they will bring things along there. All you have to do is do what you do, and they will do the rest in terms of that kind of pop-up idea. Other people that do it with shelves, you know, just shelf space or things like that. So I think that there is an opportunity to kind of professionalise that as well and turn that into something that's agile and of our time, rather than just something that's a version of a market stall.
One final question, and as Matt Ford does on the political podcast, one sentence question, one sentence answers from the panel, please. So, gentlemen there. Yep.
Oh, mine's quite long, sorry. I mean,
please truncate it, we've got 2 minutes.
I have to completely disagree with you about the Tesco's example, that they're providing a business that other people don't want, that people want, and they don't want an individual business because they're too expensive. I found since the pandemic, there's a local shop, a big Tesco in the corner. You go in there in the evening, there's hardly anything for sale.
That's not a question, it's an opinion. If we've got a question, please. Yep, sorry, the front.
What about forming a relationship between education in local communities and the high street? It seems to be talking about getting makers and retail, but most, at the end of education, sort of art schools or colleges of higher education, these empty shop fronts, these long leggy high streets, the idea of them becoming classrooms or spaces for people to, as a kind of generation of people learning and making in there, and actually that then becomes your office population. It's not, you know, it's not necessarily just workers, but it's actually about creating a vibrant place where youth starts to occupy and recolonise the central cities and towns.
One sentence answers?
Yes, and there are plenty of restaurants, kitchens, where you've got colleges, catering, use it.
Yes, I think it's Gloucester, where the university has bought the Devons and is putting a campus on the high street. Why not? Yeah.
And the whole of the downtown of Phoenix is being built out of Phoenix University.
So final contrary reviews, been 3 yeses so far.
I think you found something we all agree on, yeah. I'm very in favour of people being able to convert use flexibly depending on what people want, and that, yeah.
What a wonderful way. Complete agreement on the panel for the first time this afternoon. I'm afraid we're done now because we have a star speaker in the main hall, Sajid Javid, the Secretary of State for, which one is he now? Health at the moment, thank you very much. So thank you very much, and please give a round of applause to the panel in the usual way.